right? So one of the realizations we had some years ago is that, yeah, people have these emotions, yeah, people have these personal experiences, but there was something about the difference between inner dances that were working on BPM levels that are familiar with people. And these were the ones we found to be more addictive as opposed to the inner dances that were more distanced, that sometimes, yes, brings people more to the void where they have a hard time speaking about certain things. But at the same time, there wasn't the same level of attachment and levels of addiction. So what do we know about addiction? I think maybe there could be ways of mapping this out in the board. Okay. Share screen. Let's make another chart. So dopamine is the one neurotransmitter that is one of the easiest to activate. And dopamine is very implicated in psychosis, and it's very much implicated in REM. So you can't go into REM without dopamine. So dopamine normally goes into these different sections that's to do with attention, memory, what else is there? Emotion and motor functions, or body movement, or body sensations. When you compare inner dance to this, what is interesting is that, yeah, a lot of these do happen in the inner dance process. But when you do compare it to the dream state, this one obviously does not work so much when we're sleeping. As we have defined it right now, when you go into REM state, the absence of serotonin actually allows you to go into that which is without emotion. This is kind of common for both dream and inner dance. This one is obviously not happening in the inner dance process. So what we learned many years ago, maybe at least 10 years ago, is one of the ways we keep changing the music, whether it be BPM, whether it be frequency, amplitude, genres. When we shift music outside of that which people know, that which they remember, that which they pay attention to, that which they're attached to, dopamine is rerouted into the striatum rather than the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, the hippocampus, the amygdala, or the nucleus accumbens. Striatum is responsible for what's called newness or novelty. So for that reason, we try not to use the same music that people would expect, because dopamine is responsible for anticipation. When people are learning to expect that this kind of music that's incoming now is going to bring about that emotion or that kind of body movement, it creates addiction. Addiction being, like a corollary to anticipation. So dopamine being still quite important. When you have dopamine disorders, then you start to experience things like Parkinson's, dementia. It's not that we're canceling out dopamine, it's that we are rerouting dopamine so it doesn't just hold addictive possibilities. I mean, going back to the chart, when you look at this, one of the things that I didn't list down here because of the lack of space would be prolactin. Okay, I'll just spell it right here. Prolactin is a hormone released still by the hypothalamus, and its role is to allow for it's to allow for milk to be produced by the mother. So okay, why are we bringing this up, and where are men actually connected to this? So what inhibit? So actually no. So prolactin is not released by the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus releases what's called dopamine, but dopamine in the form of prolactin, prolactin inhibiting hormone, or PIH. So dopamine actually inhibits the production of prolactin. And if prolactin is not just responsible for producing milk in the mother who is breastfeeding, prolactin is also actually being used to myelinate. We've talked about this in many Zoom calls. Myelination is a synapse's ability to coat itself in this white protective sheath that allows for greater transmission of electricity, of information between the neurons. So underneath the gray matter of the brain, our brain's actually white. And coincidentally, what makes that white is prolactin. It's responsible for the synthesis of what is called oligodendrocytes. Okay, that's what allows for the So dopamine. When people sometimes ask, why does dopamine lead not just to addiction, but, if I could say the word, stupidity? The more we just keep going for the hit, for the nice feeling, for the pleasure, how does that actually lead to ignorance? People say, okay, I'm here for my bliss. But then there's a saying that bliss equals to ignorance. This partially explains it, that when you release so much dopamine, you actually start inhibiting other neurotransmitters, which is prolactin, which is serotonin as well, glutamate, and GABA, all of which are responsible for learning. So the more you do certain types of energy work, the mind actually starts to blank out, because you're firing so many neurons. And when you're inhibiting something like prolactin, you're not able to myelinate the synapses. They don't strengthen, basically. Myelin strengthens the neurons, or the synapses. And when you're not strengthening the synapses, you can keep firing them, you can keep wiring them, but you're not holding patterns. You're not like holding things in the long term. So that's one of the explanations of why and how dopamine isn't always useful. So let's go back to the screen. Okay, so where were we? Yeah, so okay, let's maybe look at this. So here's where I would bring up GABA. So in the first stages of sleep, okay, a lot of you know this chart. You, especially Tom, you made this chart with the beans. So I know you know this. This is where we experience the most delta. Okay, now during slow wave sleep, neurotransmitters are globally inhibited by GABA. Okay, so the most inhibitory chemical in the body is called GABA. And GABA is actually inhibited by dopamine. So when we use too much dopamine, when we're addicted, then GABA doesn't happen. And so GABA is almost usually expressed when we experience it goes with delta, which is funny, because GABA, it's specifically gamma something, gamma being the highest. But for you to actually transmit GABA, you need a lot of delta. And so it's in slow wave sleep that the most learning actually happens. Like, it's an illusion that most learning happens when we're awake, through the intervention of GABA being that which inhibits a lot of the excitatory elements. it's here. It's when we are the most sleep is when we are the most learning. So for that reason, a lot of the inner dances that we've been experimenting with using the Noise app, using different new programs, whether it be Ableton or Logic Pro or The Voice, what we're learning to do is to hold this deep, slow wave, which is actually GABAergic by nature, which balances the glutamatergic. The glutamate is the excitatory drug. And if you leave glutamate to its own, glutamate becomes toxic, it becomes dangerous, becomes addictive. It doesn't allow your mind to function properly. Okay, so let's go back to the screen. So I think what's important here is to understand the mechanisms of sleep. Like basic questions: why do we even sleep at all? What's in sleep to begin with? So what would be implicated in that would be okay, there's already a picture that kind of describes that, and it would be this one. In the last call, we talked about this thing right here, the internal clock, which is called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. It's a part of the hypothalamus, and it sends message. You know, okay, so wait, it's you receive light to the eyes, and then that through the photosensitive retinal ganglion cells sends messages to the hypothalamus, that then sends messages to the pineal gland. I need to go to sleep. Okay, so talking about activation and inhibition, when there's this sting, okay, when we are exposed to this sting, what happens is the suprachiasmatic nucleus is quiet and the pineal gland is not activated. So what activates the pineal gland? It's darkness. So there is this very logical reason why we ask people, close your eyes, and then you don't see that. And just by that measure of allowing people to close their eyes, you're already sending, even now, you close your eyes, you're already sending messages to your hypothalamus, specifically the suprachiasmatic nucleus, that then sends messages to the pineal gland, that then creates or synthesizes this thing called like melatonin. So what's always interested me is, where does melatonin actually come from? Melatonin is synthesized initially from, it's really funny, it's synthesized initially from glutamate, and then that is synthesized into serotonin. All these things that are inhibited in REM sleep are actually internally happening within the pineal gland. And then serotonin is then synthesized into norepinephrine. Isn't that funny? Okay, this is just messy to say. Serotonin, no, let me just write it down. Norepinephrine. So the two main neurotransmitters that are totally absent in REM state are totally present within what I don't know about the ancients, but at least Rene Descartes called this part of the brain the third eye. Okay, so it's interesting. When you close your two eyes, the third eye opens and starts to take the three of some of the most excitatory chemistries, and then creates something new out of it called melatonin, which is that brings us into the dream state, that brings us into the like super deep sleep. So after this, then this might kind of make sense to you, that as soon as it starts to get dark here, So maybe this is in several parts of the world that doesn't experience winter. As soon as it gets dark, naturally, melatonin starts to go up. And okay, this chart says it's highest in midnight, but when you check some of the other charts, melatonin is highest more or less at 3 o'clock in the morning. This is the most common graph that we see. Okay. So I think melatonin would be like a part of the vocabulary that you would want to familiarize with, because when already you're given an explanation as to how and why people are able to go deep just by laying down and closing their eyes. You're actually like doing this trick, bringing pretense to the body that even though it's the day, you're actually creating this absence of the stimulus of photons of light, already putting them into a kind of half sleep mode, right? It brings them into the dream just through the stimulus of darkness. So there is a difference between doing inner dance in a bright lit day outside and doing it at night. The more powerful processes actually usually happen during the day, but in a dark room. When you try to do it during the night, when melatonin is already quite high and cortisol is already kind of going low, then a lot of people really just feel sleepy. Just like Tom right now. So yeah, like all of these, as I was like bringing up as a possibility, these are things that we could think about as elements that we are affecting or utilizing. I'm not sure how much I need to totally speak in this regard, because like we can have more of a conversation. I don't know how long this needs to take, but it's really up to you. There is no judgment as to what is better, because in the chat group we did talk about how maybe there is a reason why people need to experience looking at like their fear. So some of us might try to mimic the REM state by creating an absence of norepinephrine or serotonin, but then we are not exactly sleeping. So there is still a lot of value in creating the cathartic elements by which cortisol, serotonin, oxytocin, norepinephrine, epinephrine, even glutamate would be useful. It's just that we are opening up the possibilities that mimicking the REM state, no, not even the REM state, but something even closer to non-REM would bring about more detachment and more observation, which a lot of facilitators are experiencing more and more like now. Some of what I shared to you might explain the new musical forms that are being used in many processes. The more obvious being having to do with rhythm, like the human brain or the human autonomic nervous system normally recognizes a certain range of rhythm, and it's somewhere between, I don't know, like 40 beats per minute to 240 or 280, or for many it's only up to 180 beats per minute. So when you go beyond that, let's say if it's lower than 40 beats per minute, or faster than, let's say you go up to 320 beats per minute, when you use a program like Ableton, you can go up to 999 beats per minute. The human brain doesn't recognize this as music anymore. So that is more connotative of a much deeper sleep experience. it's not the first stages of sleep being non-REM 1 or non-REM 2, which is when you're still holding quite a lot of cortisol and some serotonin, some oxytocin, a lot of dopamine in the system. When you establish this weirder form of music, you tend to establish this just greater distance in the way synapses can connect throughout the whole field. And maybe there is even a chance of myelinating the synapses. And I think that's where the sleep playlists are working. I think that's why we're using them. It's because myelination, I think, is happening throughout, because a lot of these new playlists that are happening in sleep time is like 2.5 hours, 3 hours long. So you are covering at least 2 full waves. So exposing people to the playlists that are designed in many ways for sleeping, there's myelination happening. Okay, so let's open this up for questions, insights, ideas. Tom, initially, what do you?
Yeah, that actually, there's a lot of that makes more sense now. I think the idea of circling it a few different times is helping it land a bit more. Just quickly for that last point, you were talking about the myelination happening with these new sounds, and you're talking about new synapses being created and the myelin kind of strengthening those synapses, but in relationship to sleep, like why is it different? Why are they it's being created, the new synapses are being created? I think, what am I trying to say here? Like what kind of synapses, like what kind of connections are being made that weren't there before?
Yeah, I think myelination is always happening. It's just a matter of like how much myelination. So one example I could think about is when they studied the brains of musicians. Okay, like musicians, they tend to have a much thicker corpus callosum, and then there's certain parts of the brain that tend to be a lot thicker. People attribute this not just because of their exposure to sound, but through the discipline of learning music. Like, for example, when you think of the piano or the guitar, you need to use both hands. So you need to be ambidextrous. So the kinds of connections that are available for musicians would be more right-brained, more, it's not as linear because sound is less linear as a language. But when they do study the hippocampus region of musicians, memory centers aren't as different as compared to other people, whether academic or other artists. So it seems like music is not the only important intelligence that leads to myelination. It's just that when we are stuck with, like stress, with logic, with linearity, what we myelinate is quite limited. But myelination stops happening when we stop learning. Myelination is something that naturally happens when we learn. So I guess all the conditions where, you know what happens when learning stops. It's pretty much, I don't need to know that. I know that already. I'm not curious. I'm not open to new things because I already know what I need to know. So it feels like the inner dance is a way of bringing about awe or curiosity just by the conditions of bringing sounds, vibrations, right-brained awareness that could help the left-brained sequential thinking process.
So it's kind of like the novelty that allows the spontaneity and the responsiveness to arise rather than reactivity.
Yeah. Even if we study the way we use music, there are certain stages where the goal for one would be to get people to shatter some of the old beliefs that aren't working for them anymore. And then when we start to raise the waves, and then, you know, there's kind of like this art that's partially intuitive, partially learned through experience or through studying, how new ideas and new concepts would be formed, like, which happens usually after there has been a deconstruction or an emotional roller coaster explosion fruit salad thing that just messed things up that was too ordered before. The pointing this out, it's not all facilitators that realize this, because there are facilitators who get stuck with the cathartic emotional release factor. And when there's not enough integration, you know, either built into particular stages that are independent of the other stages, or built into all the stages. Because when you study some of the new playlists that are being created now, there's not as much a clear rising and falling. It's almost like a lot of the waves are being held together. And for me, one of the reasons why I'm doing this is I am interested in I'm interested in what's beyond the addiction, and I'm interested in the myelination of synapses.
So do you think then that with people who are, say, maybe emotionally numb or experiencing numbness in regards to emotions, that is there like a necessary stage that you would have to go through in order to get to, hey, I'm feeling something now, I'm experiencing these emotions, and then after that you go through to like kind of the new playlist model? Or do you think you can kind of skip through that?
I've met too many people who did not need to go through the emotional roller coaster, but had amazing experiences. So in fact, like a lot of people, because they see the advertising, they see like audio visual things out there that says that this is what's supposed to happen. They're literally just there, and then nothing's happening, and then they get stuck because of the level of anticipation, which is dopaminergic by nature. We're actually not serving them. So we're almost needing to present more context now, that don't expect that just because you saw that being advertised. And now there are these concepts like Kundalini that states that if your body is not moving, not going through these release, then there's something wrong with you. There has to be a totally new system right now that's more inclusive and presents that all of these possible elements are part of a learning journey somehow.
So do you find people are moving more with the new playlists or less?
No, they're moving much less. There are movements happening, but they're quite rare. So I'm definitely a lot more interested in the non-movement now because of the feedbacks that I've been getting. I'm happier with them overall.
Feedback, what do you mean? What kind of feedback?
Just the experiences seem to be a lot more integrative. I'm happier with the bases for transformation I'm seeing in the retreats or the short workshops that I'm seeing. It's quite complex, because when I do introduce these new systems where people are used to the old systems, there's always this transition period. So half the room, like yesterday, Kitty from Australia, I don't know if you know her, she's from Sydney. She decided to use corpus callosum in Sydney, and she had as many as 25 people there. A lot of the people, you know, they experienced CAP and the inner dance sessions she used to hold. So a lot of them were kind of shocked. A lot of them were uncomfortable, but at the same time, those who were uncomfortable said there's something there that's actually quite cool. So there's always this really awkward, when you get this short haircut and you want to grow it, there's that awkward transition phase where, okay, don't look at me, I'm not done yet. Like no artist likes someone looking over their shoulder when they're in the process of creation. So it brings an awkward sensibility to those who are experiencing the new and the old and are caught in between, because all of these whole different dimensions, going back to this quotation by this music theorist, rhythm organizes time. And when you're holding a certain rhythmicity, you're actually holding a certain dimension. So when you introduce anyone to a stimulus, the more they get indoctrinated to a certain rhythm, they actually start to go there. They stay there. And the longer they stay there, the harder it might be to move to another space. So what facilitators are learning now is you actually need to now be constantly changing so that people are always now constantly growing, rather than getting stuck with an idea that this is an inner dance or that's like an energy. Yeah.
It sounds like there's a kind of a parallel with when you're exercising as well, and you have to constantly keep changing the workout so that you're not, otherwise your body gets used to it and it gets stuck there and doesn't have the same effectiveness.
It's the very workings of dopamine. Like dopamine likes to look for pleasure. It anticipates. It doesn't actually let you feel good. It's always anticipating the next. It's never satisfied. So there is a need to kind of break patterns even as they're forming. This, I think, would allow facilitators themselves to constantly be growing. They would never become teachers or healers or gurus. They always need to be students of the energy or the space. They have to constantly be listening to what are the changes always happening in the human body as we keep evolving. So the more I think you try to keep institutionalizing the energy, that's when we're not really true to what this actually does, right? In a way, it's all about feedback, and like that's what AI is. It's like the instant you get feedback, there's this integration constantly happening, but that's also how the brain naturally works. It's just that I think we've done something to the nervous system that doesn't really allow that to happen so much. It's like we've tried to push away change as much as possible so we could control the system. So something like inner dance is there to bring about this more natural feedback system that allowed us to evolve to this point. Dopamine is the culprit. Dopamine is it. Dopamine anticipates. It doesn't like pain. It likes to look for pleasure. And we have to be really honest that the work that we do is very addictive, because the structure that's the most easily affected by the music is dopamine. It's the first that gets hit. So I myself have been counteracting it for quite a lot of years already. So when I say like I'm happier with the feedbacks that I'm getting, it's to do with dopamine.
Just one more thing then. So around the end of the session, like the end of the new sessions, or when I've been putting together sounds, different sounds, I'll tend to kind of bring it back together at the end of a session to almost like a kind of a balm for people, so to give them something that is going to help soothe them a little bit so they don't leave kind of too exploded or too strung out. Like what would your thoughts be on that?
Yeah, it's great. I probably would do the same. It's just that I'm not doing frontline work. I'm usually in the retreat modes where people stay for a long time. It's just that the playlist that I'm using is a lot more gentle. Like I use maybe, if I do recordings that's using the instruments, the synthesizers that I'm using, I usually put them in the background, and it would be maybe 70% my noise and 30% those. So I don't really know explosive so much anymore. I'm actually I'm super duper careful. I'm happy when it happens, but I don't put so much stimulus to make it happen, because for me the explosions usually prevent the journey, which is partly what I was saying about serotonin and norepinephrine needing to be totally gone during the REM state. I've almost like, yeah, like it's very, very little for me. I'm almost not there anymore. But I'm always happy when it happens, for sure. I think a lot of that's actually up to us, because it's usually the facilitator that looks for the explosion, not just the participants, because the explosions validate the experience in real time. It helps us stay a lot more present when it's happening. It's like, okay, yeah, something's happening. But that places us on the same level of those in the session that's experience seeking. And those who are experience seeking are validation seeking. They're looking for an answer from the outside, that which, it's not, it still boils down to causation. It's like they're still looking for a person outside or an energy outside to do it for them. And normally when people are given that validation, they just keep staying in that loop, just like Facebook or other forms of media that are built out of validation. It's very hard to break that. So in me, I had to break that inside myself. I literally had to get to a point where I love you, but it should not matter to me actually what comes about, because whatever is going to be. And when I reached that, the whole system kind of changed. Like I wasn't listening just to people's bodies anymore. I was listening to like the whole system. It just so happened to be that there were bodies there. That's not easy to when you do these sessions in the cities, or when you're trying to form community, or almost anywhere, because you don't want people to be wasting their time. You traveled far away just to get there, and you are spending energy and time there. But like I think we're pleasing people too much. If we're a lot more centered and focused, and then we're merging the study with the practice, we'd access like a lot deeper levels somehow. And this isn't easy. It takes a while to kind of get there, because all the systems need to be firing. You need to build like a whole culture almost, which is alien.
Yeah, I was just thinking as you're saying, it's like with a context for all of this, when you can put it into a context, then it makes it a bit easier for people to grasp maybe why they come, like why they come to have these experiences that might be uncomfortable with this session. I think it was a couple of months ago or a month ago, and I'd used this new playlist that I'd made, and there's something in me that really liked it, but a lot of the feedback was it's like just didn't get a break, like it wasn't didn't feel very good. But I liked it because of its weirdness and of how it was stringing out. Well, for me, I could hear like the different strings in it and putting it together, and I don't know, it was like a psychedelic trip. in sound, really. But yeah, the feedback was it's like I didn't like it as much as some of the other playlists that you
Yeah,
and
yeah.
that, yeah. So it was, then there's a part that's like, well, yeah, should I be doing what people like? What is it that's actually good for them? Is there a combination between those two things of what people like enough so they're interested in it, but also enough of what's good for them, and like to build a bridge between those two things, you know?
I want to give a short story that would be useful for you and others. Then let's hear from Una. She raised her hand. So one of the big reasons why I myself ended up making the playlists the way they're happening now, there was this woman in Maya in a retreat a couple of months ago from Belgium, and I might have spoken about it with you a little bit. She had this broken brain from an accident 30 years ago. So she was so hypersensitive that she couldn't stand a lot of the sounds that were too high pitched. And then she started complaining about the bass. So that's both ends. She can't stand the high pitched and then the bass. Then she couldn't stand certain rhythms. So what I did was I kept at it. I kept refining it at the same time, but I kept at it. And later, even when she went back to Belgium, I kept telling her, every time you find something uncomfortable, I'd like you to sit with it. I'd like you to do it again. I'd like you to do it again. So that taught me a lot, because what happened was, in the beginning, it took her a while, like several sessions, maybe 4 sessions, 5 sessions, before she could stand a particular thing that was so irritating to her. It could be the high-pitched noise or the bass, and then when she's okay with that, then I could go into even weirder sections. And then what I noticed was she would write to me, okay, I actually cannot stand any other thing than that which was annoying me before. The very thing that I hated is the only thing I can stand right now. So what this is telling us is, the more uncomfortable it is, the more it does, in fact. So if we're giving them what feels good, then that's the addictive thing. That's hard for us, because that's one of the big reasons why people are coming, because they want to feel good. Now, what this is saying is you're supposed to sit with it, because exactly, it doesn't feel good. Ouch, like that. Even I want to run away from doing this, because we're going to get in trouble. But I and others have at least succeeded enough to be able to do this well. We were doing these workshops in Palawan with the children. A lot of it was helped out because we were doing it as a team. There were so many people here, like Oscar, Yella, Ahla, and Fanny, and a whole bunch of people were doing the workshops with the kids, and they just kept trusting and trusting. So by the time we started to really hold inner dance using just the noise app, even 10 minutes were bringing about like such big visions. My intuition is that as you maybe do this panel talk in the Deep Mind building in London, I think certain things might actually open, because what you're being given, you and Lisa are being given, is a chance to contextualize this in a cogent, coherent, congruent way, which is actually quite rare. Because when you hold a session, you're lucky at 10 minutes, 15 minutes as an intro, and then people lay down. It's just not enough. What might be needed right now is to be able to talk about this where people will not be able to experience it. Just talk about it. Let them ask questions. Let them come to you later. And then that would be enough indigo to bring about the yellow, the orange, the blue. You haven't had this before, it's different when you have that formal setting and then people are listening, and you were invited, you didn't push us, they asked you to come there. So I have a good feeling, the fact that we're putting so much energy to these conversations. Let's see if Una has like something to add. layers wise to this dialogue?
Hey, wow. Yeah, I have so many from all the angles that you've covered. But maybe on that last one with the sessions, it's exactly what I have also been now recently encountering with the people coming to the sessions, because there are people who come quite frequently. There's one guy who has come to all of our sessions, and he's really he can feel there's something, but he's quite experience seeking. So yeah, through what, like, not so long ago, I actually sent him 2 playlists because he was so eager to do it, and I was away and we were not holding sessions, so I sent him playlist meanwhile. And I sent him a synchronic and one other playlist that I made, the first playlist I made which had much more songs. And yeah, this is also something about our sessions, is that we used to obviously have much more playlists with songs layered, but now we use the tools that are more noise and since the synthesizers, but the apps. And so there is maybe songs in there, but they I think they're quite unrecognizable, and sort of like I can really feel that this is the direction the music needs to go, is where you don't satisfy where you're not satisfying that need. And this particular guy, he, for example, said last session, like, he was like, this was the best so far, and like, you know, like, as in, like, this music was so well constructed. Like, he always has a good and bad sort of and preferences, and like, in a way, quite so many opinions. And like, he thinks that the playlist that I sent, for example, the first one that has songs, because I was really curious about his feedback on synchronic, he said, like, yeah, the playlist with the songs is like a rebirth playlist, and he experienced a lot, but he doesn't have pains. He listened to synchronic a few times, but he didn't have as much patience with it. And I still have, like, I still can sense this desire in myself to look for obvious feedback from the participants. But there's, yeah, I can really see that the journey is changing for people. They're going into deeper ones, and they'll move less, and in a way, let's say, what was I saying? Yeah, in a way, this is just so obvious that I can't, like, I can't question it. So even though there's, yeah, like I say, something in me that looks for that maybe movement or some sort of like feedback for me as a facilitator, but then I get another participant asking me, like, so she's also been coming a few times, and she keeps falling asleep, and she says, like, she's in a little bit this world, I think, when she asks these questions, like, what am I doing wrong, because I'm not moving, and I fall asleep, and I come here and I just enter nothingness, because I just fall, what she thinks she falls out, you know, and doesn't experience because she's sleeping. And yeah, and I just somehow tried to answer her to trust that her body and her everything goes into what it needs to go into in the sessions, and she's experiencing exactly what she's supposed to experience. But it's very interesting to hold a space where some people really need to move and they really need to experience so cathartically and like so external in a way, and then there's people somehow stuck in the expectation, and then there's people who are so, especially first comers, who just enter there and they just go into such a deep space because they are just so open and they don't know, and then they're not in that space, and then they just go into the most profound experiences. But what I see as a development in the session is that there is very different feedback now, like as in it's very diverse. People sometimes even say like, I felt horrible, just horrible the whole time. And some people say they've done a psychedelic journey and it was more difficult than that. And I actually used synchronic when I had that feedback, like just to finish the session was really extremely difficult because they were going through both the body sensation, a hard time, and then also just a really difficult journey. And so I trust the space that we conduct with the new music, and I see that it's possible to bridge, like maybe Tom is explaining, like I listened to his new playlist, and for me it was really deep because there was a lot of layers, and it was really like I remembered losing consciousness a bit and then coming back, and I felt my body vibrate. I think he used some gongs or something in it, but I think that's it's always confirmed again and again that the more we take people in the space through something they are looking for and they're seeking, we are just feeding into their addiction. And then also there was a feedback from a woman who said like there was one sound that just directly took me into my phobia, and she was experiencing her phobia like the whole session. And that was like, it's definitely bringing people into what they really need to face. But what I really enjoy now about the talk, especially how Tom is like the place he's coming from, going on some sort of a panel or like having to speak about inner dance and to talk, is like I recognize this place, or like this I recognize this desire in myself to go into that, to talk about it more, to give more space and create actually more platforms where we speak about inner dance, where we don't just go into the experience, and it's mostly because I need it. I think I know that this is the way I could grow now within what inner dance is. It's not just the experience, and it's actually the linking. How are we going to take what the body knows so well and what we experience so profoundly when we lay down, and like the body holds the intelligence, and this I can trust. But I don't know, how am I going to link that pureness into a very conditioned modern mind that is the one that expresses, or it's the one that actually words stuff. So I'm so like, when you said in the last Zoom call, when you were trying to sort of get a hold of it, and you were like almost trying to do your bullets, and you're doing you use the word like I feel like I need to linearize it, and I recognize that also so well. But I think that you don't need to linearize it. I think what could speak through you is the knowledge. Like the way you speak about inner dance is actually already like, it's very holistic, and it comes, like Pi speaks, it's like it comes from many different angles, but it always somehow lands in the center essence. So yeah, and it's also referring to how Ahlan put it yesterday. It's like we know a lot, and the words are the medium. And yeah, this is just something I think is also our inner dance process as students of this energy still, like, is to trust, to trust it, that we know. But yeah, I'm really inspired to be again in the call and to listen to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Tom, you wanted to?
Yeah, I was just wanting to speak to that a little bit. As you were speaking, there's something that kind of fell into place a little bit. And so as we've been speaking, I was making linear notes, but then also a lot of kind of non-linear notes as well. And just trying to think of it, this is the thing that came up. It's like thinking in nodes rather than thinking in a linear format. I'd like to have both. Like I would like to have the ability to linearize it and lay people through, like walk people through. Here's a foundational understanding that can lead to another foundational understanding, but also at the same time, be aware that it doesn't always work in that kind of straight line. But something about having people feel safe enough to say, we can explore this idea, and then here's another foundational idea, and then together you can start to put them together, maybe like blocks or modules or something like that, which is this thinking in nodes thing. But it occurred to me that I was thinking about how discomfort pulls out adaptation, like discomfort pulls out genetic potential in people, and without, like, there's mythological literature that points to that idea of like the call to go, say, on an adventure, to go from something that's comfortable into something that's uncomfortable, to pull out the evolutionary potential of an organism. And I think that might be a useful frame for me to start describing. It's like why these soundscapes are potentially so uncomfortable. Why is it that when you lie down and you start, it's like I did one of Caro's playlists and I was on mushrooms and I had to turn it off halfway through because it was too much. Like, it was amazing. And for the first half of it, I was like lying down, eyes closed, on mushrooms, and just the visuals were just sweeping through my brain. And then it got to this bit where there was like a truck humming, and suddenly I was like in the war in Ukraine, and I just thought, all right, this is a bit too much, so I need to kind of chill out a bit here. And I guess it's like I'm thinking about inner dance in terms of in the same way that Pi was talking with the nature sounds, and being a lot more gentle with the nature sounds and kind of the balm, and like that, you say, like the window of optimal growth or something like that, where the level of challenge meets the level of ability, or just stretches it outside just enough. So, in the same way that if you go to the gym, and obviously probably know that I use gym analogies a lot, it's a good reference point for me, but it's like you go and try to lift 500 kilos, you're going to break your back and you're going to be out for the next year or something like that. But if you just kind of build up slowly into it, that's what I'm thinking about, these ways to bridge and to balm at the end, and ways to kind of ease people into discomfort. And when I look at some of the playlists that I've created over the years, they have actually represented that quite a lot. So I did have areas that were just like chaos, just chaotic sounds and gongs and drums and people shouting, and then it would kind of come back together in this rhythm, and then it would explode out again, and then come back together in this rhythm. And then I guess some of the value that I see in the 12 stages thing still, or like the kind of the hero journey model, is that it gives a kind of a context for people to put the discomfort into. It's like, well, it's not all just lying down in discomfort. Like, there is discomfort, and there is chaos, and there is anarchy, and there is the kind of discombobulation that's going to draw out some genetic potential, evolutionary potential in me, but it's within the context of I guess like a narrative arc in some way. So yeah, I'm just thinking about all this stuff, and I had a funny thought when Pi was talking about and you were talking also about like, we're just gradually getting more and more weird with the music, and I just had this vision of 3 hours of nails on chalkboards and people screaming, things like that, and like, how much discomfort can you tolerate in one sitting? And pretty soon, I think there will be. I think we can get weirder with it, and I think that there is something in the framing of, I really like this idea of myelination. That's kind of landed in me quite well. That the sound is affecting the brain in ways that are creating myelination, new synaptic pathways, because it's uncomfortable and new and novel, and that is going to force the brain to kind of think a little bit differently in a kind of a non-linear way. It's presented with that. And I think coupling that with one of Andrew Huberman's talks, where he talks about that point where you're trying to learn something and you get to that frustration point where you just can't quite, it's like, I can't get it, and it's really annoying, and you feel like it's kind of discomfort in your brain. And he says, like, that's the point to go to, because that's where all of the synaptic growth is happening. And it feels like we are doing a kind of a version of that with inner dance as well, like synaptic growth. And I think that kind of framing and context for me helps me feel a lot more comfortable with this, like putting people through discomfort and saying, this is what you potentially could go through in these sessions, and it's fine and it's good, because it's like brain growth essentially. So yeah, I think taking those frames is.
I have something around the gym analogy that could be useful here. So one of the questions is, when does growth happen? Metabolism is made up of two parts. Catabolism would be the breaking down, and then anabolism would be the building up. So, I mean, on top and in complement to what you were sharing, I did a long run today. I haven't exercised like in a while. It's hard to exercise in Palawan. It's so hot. So I finally put my running shoes on and just went on a long run into the forest today. And I really enjoyed it. I guess in the colder climates, it's easier to do it for all these reasons. So normally, when you're pushing, that's not really when growth is happening. A lot of catabolism happens when you're exerting. Your muscles normally grow when you're at rest. So in the beginning, when you're experiencing all this cortisol, this stress hormone, like coming up along with epinephrine and orexin, it's really not pleasant to some people like it, but when you haven't exercised in a long time, it takes effort. So what happens to cortisol is when you're resting, and this happens after yoga, and then when you go into the shavasana, when cortisol begins to mix in with dopamine, and then certain synthesis happens where serotonin starts to come in, that's when we see that cortisol is actually a healthy stressor. What happens now, which is something we're trying to address, is when people have so much cortisol running through their system, even when they're sleeping. I think alcohol and caffeine would be interesting for you to bring up, maybe if certain other drugs are being used in the UK, Tom. When you think about alcohol, alcohol exhibits certain elements that's GABAergic, meaning it actually starts to simulate some of the deep, slow wave sleep elements. So when you look at the wave, kind of what I showed earlier, like cortisol begins to rise up, and the peak point would be around 9 o'clock in the morning, maybe 10 o'clock in the morning. And when you're in an office job, let's say you're like into stocks, you're a lawyer, you're like a real estate agent, you can't really keep cortisol going up right when you need it the most. Normally attention span actually starts to drop around 12 noon to 1 p.m. So one of the reasons why modern human beings are drinking so much coffee is we needed to make sure that our cortisol level just keeps going up and up and up and up, higher and higher and higher, so that we can extend that wave as long as possible. And when people drank too much coffee, and some people don't need to drink too much coffee, they can adrenalize themselves easily just by exposing themselves to stress, and then they release stress hormone. It then becomes really hard to drop that back again. So alcohol becomes really useful at the latter part of the day to bring about the onset of slow wave sleep a lot earlier. They're trying to pull slow wave sleep because that's how homeostasis sets in. It's like when you know that your circadian rhythms are so out of shot that you'll just experience insomnia if you have so much orexin and epinephrine and cortisol in your system. It feels like human beings are trying to counteract cortisol and melatonin, especially. That's what alcohol does. It actually starts to release melatonin. The problem there is alcohol also exhibits dopamine and norepinephrine early. You had like 1 drink or 2 drinks, then you're not exactly getting sleepy yet. So what am I talking about? Going back to this gym analogy, growth actually happens when we're resting. So in reflection of your question earlier on, okay, you put this balm at the end of a session, like the Shavasana part for yoga. I think there are different possibilities based on this new concept of discomfort. Because a lot of the trainings, when people give trainings and they haven't really experienced so much, but they're already giving trainings, a lot of the training modalities is actually to help the ones studying and how to give as much pleasure, how much satisfaction or instant gratification to the participants as fast and as big as possible, which is the norm today in this world of modern media. People want it fast, they want it big, and they want it easy. They don't want to put in effort. They'd like to make it fast, bigger, easy. And that's really not where growth happens, especially because the thing is dopaminergic in nature. In my experience, either in the music itself, how I would hold it, or in the way I use words, something could be comfortable or not, but what is actually the balm, which in the gym analogy would be like, where does growth happen so that it's not just stressful? Even when it's stressful, there's still growth that can happen. It's about truth. It's just speaking from where you're coming from. That's usually going to be integrative. Now, I'm able to hold the science and the frameworks that I'm able to hold because there's something in it that I trust, actually, and it's the opposite of science. I came from like the chaos. I came from a lot of chaos. I came from the super mess. I came from shame. I came from guilt. I came from really going rock bottom. So when I organize things, it holds a lot of order that's actually coming from a huge map that looks like your notebook right now. So for me, the balm or the shavasana in the thing that I hold is if I know people can at least sense that this is coming from something real, something put together, something they know is actually like something. Even if they walk out the door discombobulated, earth shattered, I know that the growth will happen because they exercised, and when they rest, a lot of that stress would combine with all the other chemistries that are going to help in the integration. So whether you know anything, anyone knows anything much or not, if they're coming from something, it just needs to start from somewhere. So when I think of the music or the words, it's the same thing with me. When I hold my music, it holds a lot of layers because that's coming from just a lot. So when I put things together, it's a big puzzle, and I'm not satisfied with like the 4-piece puzzle. That doesn't interest me. I want a puzzle that has 10,000 pieces, and I'm interested in how that comes together, because that's the brain has like hundreds of billions of neurons. No, sorry, just about 80 billion neurons, and it's not 4 pieces. So I think you yourself, you already quite a lot got quite a lot of chaos and order there. And if you could just step in, messy notes or not, I think it's just going to come. I think it's getting clearer and clearer to you, just because we're bringing this into conversation as a way of practice, listening and speaking.
Yeah, there's something that occurred to me when you were talking about, so the growth happening when you're resting is familiar with the idea, and then you were talking about how to have growth happen when you're not resting, and it reminded me of I guess like a kind of a flow state when you're kind of in deep rest, but also deep focused concentration at the same time. So there's like the deep relaxation, deep focus, deep something like that, and like the healing capacity of flow states, which does kind of speak to that idea of a lot of chaos and a lot of order at the same time. That feels like a good frame as well.
Yeah. I felt you so much when I was holding that inside. I thought it was for you. We want to hear from Lisa. She's helping you to hold this whole mess and order. I want to see if she's a little bit more settled now, coming from the waves of going up and down and just looking at the many pictures.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time, Pi. The past 2 Zoom sessions have been really useful. I had to listen to the last one 3 times, and I made notes along the way. So it's finally, slowly, it just takes me a while, clearly. I'm clearly like the 11-year-old who needs to be spoken to slowly. Thank you also, Una and Tom, for your shares. I got a lot out of both of them. One thing that I get asked frequently and I can't answer, which is along the same lines of what you were talking about, how sometimes it's uncomfortable. What is actually happening? It happened today with my one-on-one client. She had a back issue, and of course that hurt much more in process, and she was in quite a lot of pain in process. She wasn't listening to the new playlist. It was an older one. But again, when the process stopped, the pain just disappeared. And this happens frequently. It happens frequently with my clients in different sessions. So might you kindly explain what's happening within the body for that to happen? Because people do ask me a lot.
I would remind us of the fear avoidance cycle. it might actually be useful just to print that out and have that in the room so that they can see it, that the more people avoid the pain, the more it's going to get painful. So there's a metric that happens in real time so that when the process is at work, I don't think we can, I don't think that healing can sometimes happen if we don't feel what is there. So the pain is sometimes an actual confrontation. It doesn't need to be a confrontation. It could be an observation, but often many people, it's the process is confrontational. Can you really let go of something unless you do not experience it leaving your body? So you can tell them it's a process of saying goodbye, and if it doesn't show up, you're just hiding it. So just some simple sentences can already shift perspective so that as they walk out the door, you actually give them something to think about. Because if you play ally to their fear avoidance, what happens is they walk out the door and they just feel like, blame or like resentment. So always we hold up the mirror. You need to own up to this. You chose to be here. Anything that shows up, you're going to have to look at it. So speaking about deep mind, you look at the heart of certain words, it's the middle, right? The middle of heart is EAR and EARTH. Earth is ART, but what is at the heart of pain? What are the letters in the middle of pain? It's AI. There's authentic and artificial intelligence in pain. So tell them to go to the heart of pain. It's gonna hold some intelligence there that's quite hidden. Claro.
Thank you.
It's funny. Let's open up to the others in case anyone would like to share, give ideas, ask questions. Been here for 2 hours and it's been good. Isabel.
Hi, thank you very much for the call. Well, while you were talking, I was thinking about how the breath works in all these changes of deep sleep, REM, entering into sleep, and so on, and what relationship the change of breath could have with these, I don't know what they are, chemicals, right? That was one question, and also, well, after having that question, just a comment that as my body asked me to lay down, and for 1 hour I was like in an inner dance session during the Zoom call. So it worked exactly as if I was listening to a playlist. And that's, well, that's a comment, but also a question, because maybe it's not the sounds, it's the energy. I mean, at the end, if it's the same, if we lay down while in a Zoom call or or with a playlist, then I don't know.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
And yeah, and with regards to pain, yeah, I was feeling pain. There was energy release, and I was feeling pain. And the way to hold it, because sometimes it gets very uncomfortable and quite unbearable, obviously is to relax more. The usual thing would be going to the breath, but sometimes it's very difficult. And sometimes opening the mouth, or sometimes going into the pain, like think what is to the place of the body where it hurts, to the pain, inside the pain. And if you go deep, deep, deep inside the pain, there is another energy inside the energy of the pain, which is a good vibration, sort of to say. Yeah, and for me, each time it works differently. I mean, so one has to have like many alternatives to deal with pain. Yeah, that's all I can comment. Thank you.
Yeah, I really like the first one, the first question about the breath. Yeah, Tom is the one who began inner dance breath work, which is, I think, really interesting to begin with. There are several other groups now that are combining breath work with inner dance. What I find interesting about breathing is that the lungs would be the organ that's both a part of the somatic and the autonomic nervous system, you know, which are the two parts of the peripheral nervous system. So I find that interesting. Like, somatic means you can control your breathing, but you can only do it to a certain extent. So it's also part of the autonomic nervous system. You cannot control your breath beyond a certain duration or intensity. For example, it's really hard to breathe fast and deep at the same time. It's easier to breathe fast and shallow, or, you know, deep and slow. So there are ways to create like a grid between slow, fast, deep, shallow. So for me, given that the breathing is autonomic, my sense based on research and observation is you can actually affect the hypothalamus, which means you can control the pituitary and the other endocrine systems through the breathing. The parts of the brain that control the breath would be, okay, the pons would be implicated. The hypothalamus has many parts, and the anterior hypothalamic nucleus, the preoptic nucleus, arcuate nucleus, the ventromedial nucleus. These are parts that are related to the breath, that are related as well to thermoregulation, related to pain sense. So it's still connected to what you brought up. It's connected to the heartbeat, because obviously you change your breath, you change your heartbeat. So I think I like also then, which is I feel connected, you talking about experiencing the inner dance through language and not just through music, because that's actually what I'm used to. For so many years now, I don't listen to music. I listen to really complicated lectures spoken by experts in psychology and neurology and linguistics and anthropology and philosophy. My practice has been, I like listening to really complex things, observing what happens to my mind when I don't understand anything that's happening. It had really taught me to sit with the complex. So I realized by listening to these lectures that are PhD level, there's a slow wave sleep parasympathetic mode of listening as opposed to a sympathetic fight or flight listening. So when I get anxious and I'm listening to something I don't understand, I would not actually get to understand it. But when I sit still and I'm not like rushing in time to try to understand it, I find myself listening to the words from a whole different space. This is really important for me because when I came back from my island experience in the beach, going back to the world, it was very hard for people to understand me speaking. They couldn't understand me. they couldn't get me. They understood some parts of it, but it was coming from a really chaotic interdimensional space. So many times people could only understand me by laying down. I think Flora is in this call. She's one. I don't know if Tom ever experienced this, or Lisa, Mariela, I think, is here. Italy for sure used to only be able to listen to me by laying down. They could only do it horizontally. So that's one example of listening to the words in a horizontal way. It seemed like the only way they could understand the words was by listening to it from an inner dance space, which is maybe the vibration or whatnot. But later people would tell me they actually got it without understanding it. So it seems like there's a way of listening to things by understanding it from a whole different level. I want to think at least that I had built my way outside of that dimensionality so that I could be more understood, even as people are sitting up or standing up with their eyes open. But there were many instances where this was not actually possible for many people. So that was an inner dance training for me, like a whole bunch of people laying down, listening to, I'd be making notes, I'd be drawing things in the board, and then they couldn't watch me. They would just absorb it like that. So I think this conversation has a lot to say about schools. I think that children are not listening enough horizontally. I think there's another kind of learning that has been sidestepped, and it's learning to do with alongside music or without music, with play. I think the only learning in school that's happening is people's eyes are open and then they're sitting up. And I think that's the reason why they're not learning as they should. They need to start maybe with the vibration, and then maybe from space before going into time, and from the right brain before going to the left brain, and then from the amygdala, the basal ganglia, before going to the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, and maybe, like occipital lobe before they go into the language centers, the Broca's area, the Wernicke's area. So I think a lot of trauma happened because we learned to go into that level of thinking too fast, and a lot of inner dancey people have been rerouting their brain circuits by initially people really have to start with sound. Like in this process, in this thing that we share, we need to start with vibration, and that's the reason why a lot of people they offer their language through the playlist. Like there's something that was not being heard, so before they find their words, before they get out of their light language, spirit space, they need to speak through the music. And then later the words would start coming out, either through the sessions, like in the introduction, or like they're speaking with the energy as they're holding bodies. And then later, it's when people start to hold trainings or immersions that would formulate the chaos that a lot of people would find initially, like in the music. But it is important that people move from the vibratory to what's called the semantic. That connotes that when you lay down, what you're usually tapping into is the sound. It's using the temporal lobe where the auditory cortex is. So when people learn to read, they need to either read out loud so that they can hear themselves read. So what's happening there is they're mixing the sound along with the image, this picture of the letters that's becoming words, becoming sentences. And the more they do that, they're combining the activations that are happening in the temporal lobe along with the occipital lobe. So they're marrying the sound and the image. And for true meaning to happen, then they need to activate the other parts of the brain. When you read, you're not just reading with the visual cortex. You actually need to hear the sound even though it's not spoken out loud, the sound is stored in the written word. It's impossible for you to learn to read without adapting your brain to be able to access the occipital, which is where the visual cortex is, and the auditory, which is the temporal system. So I feel that needs to be activated at a greater degree. So when we do these, it's like a weaving together. What's coming is kind of smartness that's a lot more integrated. You know, we're just listening to each other's vibrations. You know, it's a bunch of words. The words matter, but they don't, because it's more the context in the words that's like a big picture. And those big pictures are strung together by the code, which is a much, much bigger picture where all the pictures kind of come together. So when we learn to come from greater and greater code, initially we want to listen when we know someone's speaking from there. And then when we learn to speak from there, we're needing all systems firing. So right now, for today, I couldn't even open my eyes. Like right now, I can't open my eyes while I'm speaking, because there's a lot being woven, even in this London intention with like AI and you know, like it's just so much information being integrated. The feedback loop is so fast. Italy was talking about these snail mail letters she used to send to her friends, you know, that, okay, I'm going to camp or I'm going somewhere. I write someone a letter and then I send it to them. The feedback was so slow. And I remembered that time. It's like, wow, that was really nice. But it's like, I can't imagine young people thinking about those, like remembering those, because they're emailing and suddenly the feedback is like, boom, you know, it's like, and then people respond right away. So the AI inside our brains is very algorithmic, and whether we learn or study or not, and later we should go into the understanding of music theory, because the brain holds these algorithms in cross frequency coupling. It's like the slow and the fast. It's these really interesting things: the slow, the fast, the high and the low. When you're listening to them, you're combining them together, forming an energy and meaning. And this is a really old practice. Like right now, when we listen to these amazing human beings, like the ones gathered here today and more, it's like the words that we speak are ancient sounds that were like gathered from the tribes, from the cave people. They experienced so much of Earth for so long, and then there's this really slow rise of integrating all these until just a couple of decades ago, there's this bell curve where this thing just started to rise up higher and higher and higher. Population growth, the usage of fossil fuels, information abstracts just going into this intense, you know, like rise. So the way we need to experience language right now needs to incorporate that deep story level of thinking, so that when you're listening to some people speak, what are they integrating? They're not just integrating like an idea. They're integrating all of that which had been experienced through eons. And then they're able to encapsulate that in like sentences and paragraphs and books and podcasts. It's really big and old, but they're able to put together, and all that's like vibratory, you know. It's really quite neat how we're able to do it, yet we're taking it for granted as if it is just like that, you know. What is it? There's this interesting phrase, ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny, and all that means is that when an individual goes through developmental stages, they're actually mimicking the evolutionary stages of the species. So when a baby is growing up, it's not just a baby coming into toddler, coming into adolescent, coming into adulthood. They're actually taking all of the evolutionary stages that happened in millennia or millions of years, day by day. But it would probably like explode our brains just to understand how that phylogenetic and ontogenetic rise is just so, it's just too much right now. It's just too much. So it's actually quite courageous for anyone to sit in a panel and try to do that. So inner dance comes into the story there. Inner dance holds that from that deep story place, but also from a genesis point of view, a neurogenesis, or genesis means growth, like new cells are being created out of old formulations. Inner dance actually is here to help hold this story of all stories. But unless we have a new languaging that can match just the very breadth and depth and width of this totality, we wouldn't be able to express or hear what is exactly being spoken and heard here right now. Inner dance is exactly that. It began from the vibration, and now it's actually finding a way to speak in words what happens usually like outside of words. So that's it. That's all. That's all that's happening right now. I think we need to inner dance in language soon. And this is a new, I think, shifting through this second half of 2023. I think we're going to speak to each other in the communities differently. I think we've just been through much already, and now we're just definitely moving into another level of knowing and integrating. Yeah. Okay. So any last points, and then we'll see if Tom and Lisa are feeling confident to just later on tell us how it went. Any raised hands? Any others? Flor, Italy, Maite, Marie. Okay, yeah, so I guess, yeah, we could close. Tom or Lisa would help us. So maybe Tom would be the vocal, or Marie, did you unmute?
Yeah, sorry. I just had a quick question because I missed the beginning of the talk and like I'm running around doing tons of things at the same time. So I think you want to present to a group of people. Like, did you organize already an event, or is it something that it's an idea? Like, and what's the audience? Like, how are you coming about the audience?
Tom, maybe you can explain this to Mariela, because she kind of runs through these same circles as you guys are about to.
Yeah, so we have a contract to do 2 sessions a month at this place called The Four in London, and The Four is like a co-working gym. So there's a co-working space for people to come and do their laptop stuff, and then there's gym with classes, yoga classes, fitness classes, things like that. And so we're doing inner dance in that space, and the significant thing, or the thing that was significant for me, is that it's right in the middle of the tech area of London, so around King's Cross area, where Meta, YouTube, Google, and all of the big tech companies are. And the building that we're in, we're kind of sandwiched between between the DeepMind offices. So DeepMind being the like one of the front runners in AI research and development. And so there is this well weekend that's been happening at this place called the Four this weekend. It started on Friday. Lisa went there on Friday, and we're both going to be there tomorrow. I'm apparently doing talks, and there's potentially going to be some of the people from DeepMind there. So I don't know how it's going to go. I don't know what exactly we'll be asked to speak about, or in what capacity, or how much time we'll have. But we are also going to do a session tomorrow with some of the people who are there. And then obviously we have the next few months to continue this. And it seems like the people who, like the organizers, the managers of the Four, are really keen to have us there doing these sessions. They seem to really get a lot from them, and they're kind of opening doors for us in these different directions. So there was some thoughts about working. This woman came who runs a hospice, and there was some ideas of working with a hospice there, and some ideas of working with teenagers. I can't remember what Hannah said about that, Lisa, but she said something, there was some idea about doing something with teenagers somewhere. But I mean, it's interesting that we've landed there to be right in the center of the DeepMind AI research. And I guess I'm curious to see how, like, what happens with that, and like why we're there, I suppose. So yeah, that will be the context for why we're having these discussions and trying to figure out ways to connect and communicate with tech minds and talk about the inner dance in a way that is going to be like potentially palatable and intriguing for these people, without I don't know how much you know about UK culture, but there's a lot of stiff upper lip sense and sensibility and no nonsense kind of ideas, very rational mind type stuff. And so if it alludes to something a little bit mystical, and there's a tendency to kind of write it off as, well, that's fluffy nonsense. And so we're trying to come up with ways of thinking and speaking about it in a way that's going to be communicable to people within that sector potentially. So that's what the last few calls have been an exploration of. And like that's something that's really interesting for me anyway. I think coming from the northeast of England, which is like a big mining community, it's actually funny, there is more openness there than I would have expected to, I guess, new ideas. But yeah, that's been something that's been on my mind for a while, is like how to communicate about this stuff in a way that connects and intrigues and helps people feel safe to explore and go deeper. And yeah, that's been a long running project. So that's the context.
If I'm listening to you correctly, what I hear on my side is that essentially you have a group of people that have a very strong sense of sniffing out things, and having an analytical mind that says, it's like, hey, what's my energy expenditure for paying attention to you, and what am I going to get out of it? I can relate very much to that because I also work in technology. I do system implementations for large companies. Whenever they buy a software, they need a team of people to implement that software, and I will be part of that team. And I do the design for the business rules. So if that is something that a unique kind of like, because the thing is, like, this kind of people, they can smell when something doesn't quite align, right? Like when you're coming from a place where it's like, I want to tell you about all these things in the way that you want to listen to it, but I don't really speak that language. I kind of like, I'm trying to be you. They're going to sniff that out, and it could cause a, misalignment. But what I can offer is if you need additional people that work in tech that can talk about how they've been using inner dance to improve their day or their productivity, that I can do for you.
Yeah, that would be interesting. Yeah, and within the context of like, what can it give me? I think that's what we talked about in the last call as well. That's what probably they'll want to know, is like, what can it do for me? Because I'm busy, I've got technology to build and deadlines to adhere to and all of this kind of thing. It's like, how is this going to benefit me? So yeah,
Right, but I would essentially share my story in that sense, that how I've been using it day to day. So we can, if you would like, we can talk about that.
Sure, yeah. Well, the thing is tomorrow, so I mean, I guess we don't have a lot of time, but I think, yeah, moving forward over the next few months, we're still going to be there. So yeah, that would be quite a cool conversation to have.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
it's really great, Mariela. Yeah, I think we're all co-learning together. We're like a big study group, basically. I feel like things are gonna become more clear the next weeks and months and year still. Here in Helsinki, my project is I'm trying to align the portable EEG systems along with the spectral analysis of music that matches some of music theory, brain science, and inner dance as a whole framework unto itself. And I feel these would naturally assist a lot of what we're doing, and these things we can test together. We can sense these together. It's just that this is something that's still up and coming. So yeah, if these openings keep opening, then we all just keep evolving. It's just interesting that these could have been useful like yesterday more than tomorrow. So however things go, it's just actually really cool that we can organize these dialogues, because they are helpful for all reasons.
Yeah, I definitely found this really helpful, and I think more than having that kind of linear clarity, I do feel like a kind of a nodal clarity, if that makes sense. It's like there's certain areas now where I feel more relaxed in my understanding or ways of talking about things. And I think, so what Mari was saying about they'll sniff stuff out, it was like, that was what I was, I guess, a little bit nervous of, because I knew I had some basic understanding of some things, but I didn't want to talk about things that I don't like to talk about things that I don't really know what I'm saying, like without prefacing it that I don't know exactly how this works, but it's something to do with this and this and this. And I wanted to have a little bit more solidarity, and I think it's this, this, and this, and this is how these pieces fit together as far as I know, rather than being caught in the moment and maybe getting anxious about it and kind of stemming that flow. But I feel a bit more relaxed just to show up now, and I have my massively chaotic spider nodal brain map thing going on this piece of paper, and it's like, I don't really need to look at it now, it's all there. I'll just pull it up as and when and speak to whichever questions come at me from whatever angles. So yeah, I feel a lot more confident.
Yeah, amazing. And I think this is a good way for Studios Mundos to go, that we can just do these pop-up calls because they're needed, they're relevant, they're not loopy, and this is really good practice. So looking forward to seeing how the community could keep supporting these really interesting, representational events. Okay, so let's call it a night. It's I think 9:30 there. It's 11:30 here. We don't really sleep that much anyway, but it's good to just let people have a great Saturday evening. And thanks for joining. We keep the conversation alive. So yeah, good night, everyone. Just unmute.
Night,
Thanks,
Pat.
Yeah.
Much. Thank
Joe.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.